Professor Krell stood at the front of the amphitheater, all four of his arms gesturing wildly as he paced back and forth across the polished stone floor. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the soft bioluminescent lighting, and the ridge along his cranium pulsed with that particular shade of orange that indicated supreme confidence, or as his students had learned to recognize it, the color of someone about to say something monumentally stupid. "And so, my young scholars," Krell announced, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction, "we arrive at the most persistent myth in xenobiological studies, the so-called Deathworld hypothesis." The lecture hall was packed with students from across the Galactic Coalition. There were Venari, with their crystalline wings folded neatly against their backs, a cluster of Ploxians whose gelatinous forms quivered with attention, and even a few Korthans who had bothered to materialize fully instead of attending as partially phased consciousness projections. It was Introduction to Xenobiology 101, a required course for anyone pursuing diplomatic, scientific, or commercial endeavors in Coalition space. Krell's secondary arms brought up a holographic display. It showed a red-coated planet spinning ominously in the projection field. For centuries, amateur theorists and sensationalist documentary producers have suggested that somewhere in this vast galaxy, there exist planets so hostile, so unreasonably dangerous, that they actively attempt to murder their inhabitants on a daily basis. A ripple of amusement passed through the student body. One of the Venari in the third row made a chittering sound that was the equivalent of a snort. Yes, quite ridiculous, isn't it?" Krell continued, his mandibles spreading in what might have been a smile if you were generous with your interpretation. "These hypothetical worlds are described as having unstable tectonics, violent weather patterns, deadly atmospheric conditions, and ecosystems where every creature is supposedly locked in constant evolutionary warfare." He paused for dramatic effect, letting his words hang in the air like a bad smell. "This, my students, is what we call biological impossibility." Krell's primary right arm swiped through the hologram, replacing it with a chart. "Life adapts to its environment. This is the fundamental truth of existence. A planet develops life that suits its conditions. Harsh conditions produce simple life. Moderate conditions produce complex life. This is basic gradient theory, which you all should have memorized by now, or I question what you've been doing for the past 6 weeks besides wasting my time and your family's credits." Several students shifted uncomfortably. A Plorxian in the front row deflated slightly, which was their species' version of looking guilty. "Complex, intelligent life requires stable conditions," Krell went on, warming to his topic. He was now pacing faster, his enthusiasm building. "It requires predictable seasons, manageable predator-prey relationships, and an environment that doesn't randomly attempt homicide every third rotation." The very concept of a sentient species evolving on a genuinely hostile world is laughable. They would die out long before developing tool use, let alone spaceflight. He stopped pacing and turned to face his audience directly. "Any species claiming to hail from such a world is either lying, misunderstanding their own planetary classification, or has been watching too many low-budget thriller programs. In my 43 years of teaching xenobiology, I have yet to encounter a single verified case of what the rumor mongers call a Deathworld species." That's when the hand went up. It was a small hand, 5-fingered, attached to a slender arm, that belonged to one of the newer students. She sat near the back of the amphitheater, and Krell had to squint his compound eyes to get a proper look at her. Bipedal, endoskeletal, with that strange fleshy exterior that always made him slightly uncomfortable. One of those mammal types, if he remembered correctly. She'd been quiet for most of the semester, taking notes on some primitive electronic tablet. "Yes?" Krell said, his tone carrying just enough impatience to let her know he didn't appreciate the interruption. "You have a question, miss?" He glanced down at his class roster, scrolling through names. "Chen, was it?" "Mira Chen," the human girl said, her hand still raised. Her face arranged itself into an expression that Krell's xenopsychology training suggested might be politeness, though with these fleshy species it was always hard to tell. "Yes, Professor, I have a question." "Make it quick," Krell said, already turning back to his presentation. "We have 17 more slides to cover before the session ends, and I refuse to run overtime again. The Maintenance Guild already filed a complaint about last week." "Right," so Mira said, and Krell noticed she hadn't lowered her hand yet. "How odd. About the whole Deathworld thing. When you say they don't exist, I mean exactly that," Krell interrupted, his orange confidence ridge now pulsing brighter. "They do not exist. It's a myth, a fiction, A story told by species with persecution complexes. Next question. Okay, but Mira continued, and her voice had taken on a tone that Krell would later recognize, in hindsight, as the verbal equivalent of a warning siren. What if I told you I'm from one? The lecture hall went very, very quiet. Krell's confidence ridge flickered. Just for a moment it shifted from orange to a confused yellow-green before snapping back. I'm sorry, what? A Deathworld, Mira repeated, as casually as if she'd just announced her favorite color. I'm from one, Earth, Sol system, third planet, out in the Orion Spur. We just joined the coalition last year. Several students turned in their seats to stare at her. A Venari in the row ahead of Mira shifted uncomfortably, crystalline wings rustling with a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. Krell's mandibles clicked together in what his species did instead of laughing. Miss Chen, I appreciate enthusiasm, but claiming to be from a mythical planet classification is not the way to earn participation points in my class. Earth's preliminary survey data classified it as a standard Class 7 moderate world. I reviewed the file myself when your application came through. Yeah, about that, Mira said, and now she was pulling up something on her tablet. I think whoever did that survey might have been, how do I put this, aggressively optimistic, or possibly blind, or maybe just really committed to not causing a panic. Miss Chen, I don't have time for. Our atmosphere is 21% oxygen, Mira interrupted. The lecture hall went quiet again, but this time the silence had a different quality. It was the kind of silence that happened when someone said something so absurd that brains needed extra processing time to handle it. A Ploxian in the front row made a gurgling sound. 21%. That can't be right. That's a combustion hazard. That's practically a fire waiting to happen. Oh, it happens, Mira said cheerfully. All the time, actually. We call them wildfires. Sometimes they consume thousands of square kilometers before we can stop them. Really pretty at night, though, if you're at a safe distance. Krell's primary left arm twitched. Surely you're exaggerating. No species could evolve in such a volatile, such an oxygen-rich. We breathe it just fine, Mira continued, scrolling through her tablet. In fact, we need it. Can't survive without it for more than about 4 minutes, give or take. Our cells literally burn it for fuel. We're walking controlled fire reaction. One of the Corthans flickered, its materialized form destabilizing for a moment. That's not how respiration works. That's insane. Wait until you hear about our weather, Mira said, and Krell noticed with growing alarm that she seemed to be enjoying this. So, we've got these things called hurricanes. They're basically giant rotating storm systems that can be up to 1,000 kilometers wide, with wind speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. Impossible, Krell said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. His ridge was now a very uncertain pale blue. Those wind speeds would level any structure, destroy any ecosystem in their path. Yep, Mira agreed. They do. Regularly. We've just learned to build things stronger, or evacuate, or sometimes we just hunker down and hope for the best. She swiped to another file. Oh, and then there's tornadoes. Smaller but faster winds. Some exceed 400 kilometers per hour. They can drive pieces of straw through solid wood. A Venari made a distressed crystalline chiming sound. Why would anyone live on a planet like this? Well, it's home, Mira said with a shrug that Krell's in psychology training identified as indicating nonchalance, which seemed wildly inappropriate given the conversation. Besides, it's not like the weather is even the dangerous part. Not the dangerous part. 3 students said in unison. Mira tapped her tablet again. Right, so, about our wildlife. We've got somewhere around 5 million species on our planet, give or take. And here's the fun part. Basically everything is either trying to eat something else or trying not to be eaten, sometimes both at the same time. Krell felt a strange sensation in his primary stomach. If he'd been a species capable of sweating, he would have been doing it. Surely that's an exaggeration. Stable ecosystems have balanced predator-prey ratios. Our apex predators include land mammals that can run 70 kilometers per hour and bite through bone. Mira said, her voice taking on the tone of someone reading a grocery list. Marine creatures that can grow up to 30 meters long and have teeth the size of your arm. Reptiles that haven't changed their basic body plan in millions of years because they're already perfect killing machines. Birds of prey that can spot a small rodent from 3 kilometers up and dive at speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. 300. A Ploxian started, then gave up and just quivered in distress. Oh, and the really fun part, Mira continued, we're the apex predators. Humans, we're at the top of the food chain. We got there by being persistently, stubbornly good at not dying, and also by being creative about making everything else die instead. Krell's secondary arms were now gripping the edge of his lecture podium. Miss Chen, I think perhaps you've been misinformed about your own planet's classification. These statistics cannot possibly— Want me to keep going? Mira asked. Because I haven't even started on the microscopic stuff yet, or the plants. Oh man, you guys are going to love hearing about the plants. The Korthan who had flickered earlier now fully dematerialized. Its voice came from a speaker on the desk where it had been sitting. I'm attending the rest of this lecture as a non-corporeal observer. I feel this is safer. Probably wise, Mira said. Krell's confidence ridge had gone completely gray. This was not how he'd planned for this lecture to go. This was not how he'd planned for his entire career to go. Miss Chen, he said slowly. Perhaps you should continue. For academic purposes. Mira smiled. It showed her teeth. Every predator species in the room recognized that expression for exactly what it was. Mira stood up, which in retrospect was probably a tactical error on her part because it made every student in the 3 rows ahead of her flinch visibly. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did and was just used to that reaction by now. Either option was somewhat horrifying when Krell thought about it. So human biology, Mira began, walking down the aisle toward the front of the lecture hall. Several students leaned away as she passed. Where to even start? Oh, I know. Bones. Bones are fairly standard across species, Krell said, trying desperately to regain some control of his classroom. Structural support. Mineral storage, protective casings for vital organs. We've got 206 of them, and they can heal themselves when they break, Mira said. A Venari's wings chimed sharply. When they break. How often are you breaking your structural support system? Often enough that we have entire medical specialties dedicated to it, Mira replied. Orthopedic surgeons. We've got procedures, hardware, pins, plates, screws. We can bolt broken bones back together and they'll just, fuse back into solid bone in a few weeks. Good as new, sometimes stronger than before at the break point. Krell felt his tertiary stomach clench. That's not a normal healing factor. That's excessive. That's the kind of regeneration you see in primitive species that haven't evolved past. Oh, bones are just the start, Mira said, and she had reached the front of the lecture hall now. She set her tablet down on Krell's podium, which he noticed meant she was standing uncomfortably close to him. He took a step back. Our largest organ is our skin. It's constantly replacing itself. We shed millions of dead skin cells every single day and grow new ones. Complete turnover every 2 to 4 weeks. Why would you need to replace your external protective layer so frequently? A Plorxian asked, its gelatinous form pulsing with confusion. What are you doing to it? Existing, mostly, Mira said. Our planet is loud about trying to kill us, remember? Sun radiation, abrasions, chemical exposure, temperature extremes, bacterial invasions. Our skin takes a beating, so it just keeps making more of itself. She held up her hand, palm forward. See this? If I cut myself, not super deep but enough to bleed, my body immediately starts clotting the wound. Platelets rush to the site, form a plug, stop the bleeding in minutes. Then over the next week or 2, the skin cells multiply and close the gap entirely. Small scars might remain, but larger injuries, we can stitch those up and the body just bridges the gap like it's no big deal. You're describing military-grade regeneration, Krell said quietly. His color had gone from gray to a sickly pale green. That's what we see in species engineered for combat zones, not in naturally evolved. And then there's our immune system, Mira continued, apparently on a roll now. Oh boy, our immune system. I don't want to know, a Korthan's voice said from its speaker. I have changed my auditory settings to minimize volume. Please speak quietly. Mira did not speak quietly. So we've got these things called white blood cells. They're basically tiny warriors that patrol our entire body through our bloodstream looking for anything that's not supposed to be there. Bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, whatever. And when they find something, they attack it, eat it, destroy it, mark it for destruction by other cells. That sounds reasonable for a basic immune response, Krell said, though his voice lacked conviction. We have an adaptive immune system, Mira said. It learns. It remembers. You get sick once from something. Your body creates specific antibodies for that exact pathogen and keeps them on file sometimes for your entire life. We can even train our immune systems deliberately with vaccines. which are basically controlled exposures to defanged versions of diseases. A Plorxian made a sound like a balloon deflating. You deliberately introduce pathogens into your body? For fun? Not for fun, for survival, Mira corrected. Because here's the thing. Our planet is absolutely crawling with things that want to infect us. Bacteria, viruses, prions, parasites. We're in constant biological warfare with microscopic organisms, and our immune system is so aggressive that sometimes it attacks our own cells by mistake. We have entire categories of diseases that are just our immune system being too good at its job. Krell's primary hands were now both gripping the podium. Miss Chen, I think. Oh, and we can get fevers, Mira said. When we're sick, our body cranks up its internal temperature to literally cook the infection. We can spike temperatures that would denature proteins in most species, and we just ride it out. Uncomfortable, sure, but effective. Hell hot, a Venari whispered. Normal body temperature is about 37 degrees Celsius, Mira said. Fevers can push us to 40, 41. At 42 we start having serious problems, but people have survived higher. 42 degrees. The Venari's wings shattered into a discordant shriek. That's approaching protein breakdown temperatures. You're saying you can partially cook yourselves and survive? Yep, Mira said. Not comfortably, but we manage. Although speaking of things we survive that we shouldn't, let's talk about pain tolerance. Let's not, Krell said weakly. Too late, Mira said cheerfully. So, humans can remain conscious and functional through injuries that would send most species into shock. Broken bones, torn muscles, severe lacerations. We've got documented cases of people walking on broken legs because the alternative was dying of exposure. We've got soldiers who've continued fighting after losing limbs. We've got athletes who finish competitions with torn ligaments. She pulled up an image on her tablet and projected it into the holographic display. It showed a human running. This is a thing called a marathon. It's a foot race covering 42 kilometers. People do this voluntarily. For fun, their muscles tear microscopically during the run. Their energy stores deplete and their bodies are screaming at them to stop. And they just keep going. Why? A Plorxian whimpered. Honestly, sometimes I think we just like proving we can, Mira said. Oh, which reminds me, food and toxins. No, Krell said. No, I don't want to hear about. We eat poison, Mira announced. Deliberately. We have this thing called capsaicin. It's a chemical defense mechanism evolved by plants to prevent mammals from eating them. It triggers our pain receptors. It makes our mouths feel like they're on fire. We have a whole measurement scale for how much it hurts. And we cultivate these plants specifically to put them in our food because we think the pain makes it taste better. The lecture hall had descended into chaos. Two Plorxians had retreated into defensive spheres. The Venari were producing a constant chiming sound of distress. One Korthan had dematerialized entirely and hadn't come back. We also drink ethanol, Mira continued, apparently oblivious to the panic, which is literally a poison. It damages our liver, impairs our cognitive functions, and in sufficient quantities can kill us. And we do it socially, for fun, at celebration. Krell sat down heavily in his chair. His confidence ridge had gone completely transparent, which in his species indicated a total systems failure of comprehension. Are you all right, Professor? Mira asked, and she actually sounded concerned. No, Krell said. No, I am not all right. Nothing is all right. The universe makes no sense anymore. Want me to keep going? Mira asked. Every student in the room shouted no. Simultaneously. Krell should have dismissed the class. He should have ended the lecture right there, filed an incident report with the university administration, and possibly requested a sabbatical to reevaluate his life choices. Instead, with the kind of morbid curiosity that makes people slow down to look at shuttle crashes, he heard himself say, cultural stuff. Oh yeah, Mira said, pulling up a new file on her tablet. So remember how I mentioned our planet is actively trying to kill us, and our biology is basically military-grade survival hardware? The students who hadn't fled made various sounds of traumatized acknowledgement. Well, we looked at all that danger and decided it wasn't enough, Mira said. So we invented hobbies. Hobbies are normal, Krell said, clinging desperately to this small piece of rationality. Hobbies are recreational activities that provide mental stimulation and social bonding. Every species has hobbies. We have a hobby called rock climbing, Mira said, where we scale vertical cliff faces hundreds of meters high using only our hands and feet and small pieces of metal we jam into cracks. Sometimes without safety equipment. We call that free soloing. You fall, you die. People do it anyway. The Venari made a sound like glass breaking. Why? Because it's there? Mira offered. We also have skydiving, where we jump out of perfectly functional aircraft at altitudes of 4,000 meters and fall toward the ground at terminal velocity before deploying a fabric parachute at the last possible moment. Sometimes the parachute doesn't open. People still do it. Some people do it hundreds of times. Your species has a death wish, a Plorxian stated flatly. Oh no, we're very attached to living, Mira said. We just have a weird relationship with danger. We have this thing called base jumping, which is like skydiving but from buildings, antennas, bridges and cliffs. Much lower altitudes. Much less time to fix problem. We have wingsuit flying, where we wear fabric suits and glide through the air at speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour, often through narrow mountain gaps. She swiped to another image. We have extreme skiing, where people go down mountains at insane speeds. Cave diving, where we swim through underwater tunnels where one wrong turn or equipment failure means drowning in the dark. Volcano boarding, which is exactly what it sounds like. We slide down active volcanoes on pieces of metal or wood. Active volcanoes? Krell's voice had gone up an octave, as in currently erupt. Well, not currently erupting at that exact moment usually, Mira said. That would be silly. That would be silly, Krell repeated. That specific part, that's where you draw the line. We also have rodeos, Mira continued, ignoring him, where we climb onto large aggressive herbivores that can weigh up to 900 kilograms and try to stay on while they attempt to throw us off and then trample us. We have bull running, where we let the angry herbivores chase us through streets, for fun. There's a festival dedicated to it. A Corthan rematerialized just long enough to say, I hate everything about this, and then disappeared again. Oh, but here's my favorite part, Mira said, and her face did that teeth-showing thing again. We keep pets. Pets are common, Krell said weakly. Domesticated companions. Small, manageable creatures that provide emotional support. We domesticated wolves, Mira said. Silence. I'm sorry, Avenari said carefully. You domesticated what now? Wolves. Apex predators. Pack hunters with bite forces that can crush bone. We looked at them and said, hey, those would be great to have in our homes around our children. So we spent thousands of years selectively breeding them into hundreds of different varieties, some small enough to fit in a bag, some large enough to take down a human adult. We call them dogs. They're extremely popular. We love them. You keep predators in your living spaces, Krell said. It wasn't a question. It was the statement of someone whose reality had become untethered from any rational foundation. We also domesticated cats, Mira added. Smaller predators. They're less domesticated than dogs, honestly. Still have most of their hunting instincts. They kill billions of small animals every year as a hobby. We think it's cute. We put videos of them on our information networks. Why? A Plorxian whispered. They're soft and they purr and we like them, Mira said, as if this explained anything. She pulled up another file. Oh, and our entertainment. We have entire genres of media dedicated to scaring ourselves. Horror movies, thriller novels, haunted attractions. We pay money to be frightened in controlled environments. We have roller coasters, which are machines that simulate dangerous situations like falling in high-speed collisions, and we stand in line for hours to ride them. But you know they're safe, Krell said. Surely that's the appeal. Simulated danger without real risk. Mostly safe, Mira corrected. Sometimes they malfunction. People still ride them. Oh, and remember the capsaicin thing, the painful plant poison. We have eating contests to see who can consume the most of it. We have challenges where people eat peppers so hot they have to sign medical waivers. Some people have been hospitalized. It's considered entertainment. She scrolled through her tablet. We watch competitive fighting sports where people punch each other until someone loses consciousness. We have racing sports where people drive vehicles at speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour in close proximity to each other. Crashes happen regularly. People die sometimes. The races continue. We also explore, Mira said quietly. We've climbed our highest mountains where the air is so thin we need supplemental oxygen and the cold can kill in minutes. We've descended to our deepest ocean trenches where the pressure is enough to crush most materials. We've sent people into space, which is an environment actively hostile to biological life in fragile metal containers just to see what's out there. Krell's confidence ridge had been transparent for so long he'd forgotten what color it was supposed to be. Miss Chen, he said slowly. When your species applied to join the Galactic Coalition, did anyone think to mention any of this? It was in the application, Mira said. Page 2347, subsection 12, paragraph 9. There was a checkbox for Deathworld origin. We checked it, and the survey team classified you as Class 7 moderate, Krell said. Yeah, Mira said. We figured they knew what they were doing. The Venari made a sound like wind chimes in a crematorium. They clearly did not. Era shrugged. Okay, but you're going to have questions when we get to the cultural stuff. Krell was staring at his podium, all four arms hanging limply at his sides, when Mira said the thing that finally broke him completely. "Oh right, I should probably mention," she said, her tone conversational like she was discussing the weather. Ironic, considering what her planet's weather was apparently like. Earth is actually considered pretty moderate as far as human-compatible worlds go. Every remaining student's attention snapped back to her. Even the dematerialized Corthan speaker crackled back to life. Moderate, Krell repeated. The word came out flat, emotionless, the verbal equivalent of a system shutting down to prevent further damage. Yeah, we've been doing preliminary surveys of other planets in our local cluster, Mira continued, pulling up a star chart. Found a few that could theoretically support human colonies, higher gravity, more active tectonics, more aggressive wildlife, weather patterns that make our hurricanes look like a light breeze. We're pretty excited about them actually. Excited, a Venari whispered. They're excited about worse Deathworlds. Well, yeah, Mira said, looking confused by the question. More challenges, more opportunities for adaptation, more resources in extreme environments. Plus, it'll be good practice. Practice for what? Krell asked. Though part of him, the small part of his brain that was still functioning, screamed at him not to ask, not to invite more horror into his life. For expanding further out, Mira said simply. I mean, that's why we joined the coalition, right? To learn about other species, establish trade routes and gain access to better space travel technology. Our current drive systems are pretty primitive. We've been stuck in our local system for decades. Now that we've got access to coalition space lanes and knowledge, we can really start spreading out. The temperature in the lecture hall seemed to drop several degrees. Spreading out, a Plorxian said weakly. You want to spread out. You Deathworld predators with military-grade biology and cultural insanity want to expand into the galaxy. That's the plan, Mira said brightly. We've got about 8 billion people on Earth, and population projections suggest we'll need additional living space within the next century. Colony planning committees are already drawing up proposals. We're looking at mineral-rich systems, terraforming candidates, maybe some orbital habitats. Sky's the limit, really. Or, well, not anymore, I guess. Krell's primary brain finally gave up trying to process this information and handed control over to his secondary brain, which was usually reserved for autonomic functions like breathing and not falling over. Miss Chen, he said, and his voice sounded distant even to himself. Let me see if I understand this correctly. Your species, which evolved on a planet that actively attempts homicide on a regular basis, which developed regenerative healing and aggressive immune systems and pain tolerance that borders on supernatural, which looks at danger and decides to do it recreationally, which keeps apex predators as companion animals, is now planning to expand into the wider galaxy. That is your species' goal. One of them, Mira agreed. We've also got ambitions about scientific advancement, cultural exchange, artistic development, that kind of thing. But yeah, expansion is definitely on the to-do list. A Venari stood up abruptly, wings chiming with panic. I need to contact my homeworld's diplomatic corps. Immediately. This is a security issue. It's not a security issue, Mira protested. We come in peace. That's literally the first line of our coalition application. We even put it in 17 different languages to make sure everyone understood. You come in peace now, the Venari said, backing toward the exit. But what happens when you run out of Deathworlds to colonize? What happens when nice, safe, normal planets start looking like acceptable expansion targets? That's pretty offensive, Mira said, frowning. We're not conquerors. We have strict ethics guidelines about colonization. We'd never invade an inhabited world. You'll forgive me, the Venari said, now at the door, if I don't find that entirely reassuring coming from someone whose idea of a fun weekend includes voluntary exposure to poison and controlled falling from aircraft. The door slammed behind them. Another student fled, then 3 more. Within 30 seconds the lecture hall had emptied except for Krell, Mira and one very determined Plorxian in the front row, who appeared to have locked its gelatinous form into a rigid state of existential crisis. "Did I say something wrong?" Mira asked, looking genuinely confused. Krell slowly lowered himself into his chair. His confidence ridge had progressed beyond transparent into what might have been described as inverted, which wasn't technically possible, but his biology seemed to be achieving it anyway through sheer force of trauma. "Miss Chen," he said quietly, "I have been teaching xenobiology for 43 years. I have studied thousands of species across hundreds of star systems. I have written 17 books, published over 200 papers, and sat on the Coalition's Xenobiological Standards Committee for 2 decades. "That's impressive," Mira said. "It is all meaningless," Krell continued. "Everything I thought I knew about evolutionary biology, planetary classification, and the fundamental principles of life in this universe has been thoroughly, comprehensively, and perhaps permanently destroyed in the last hour by one human girl with a tablet and a terrifyingly casual attitude toward mortality." "I really didn't mean to upset anyone," Mira said, and she actually sounded apologetic. "I just wanted to correct the misinformation about Deathworlds. You know, for academic accuracy." "Academic accuracy," Krell repeated numbly. "Should I not have done that?" Mira asked. Krell looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, carefully gathered his lecture materials, and walked toward the exit with as much dignity as he could muster, which wasn't much. At the door he paused and turned back. "Miss Chen, class is dismissed for the remainder of the semester. I am taking a sabbatical. I may be gone for several years, possibly decades. Please inform the administration that they need to find a replacement instructor, preferably one who hasn't had their entire understanding of xenobiology shattered like cheap ceramic dinnerware." "So do I still get credit for the course?" Mira called after him. Krell didn't answer. He was already halfway down the corridor, walking with the determined gait of someone heading directly to the nearest bar. Species compatibility of the beverages be damned. Back in the lecture hall, Mira gathered her things and looked at the rigid Pluxian still frozen in the front row. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need me to call someone?" The Pluxian made a sound like a balloon slowly deflating into a puddle of despair. "I'll take that as a yes," Mira said, pulling out her communication device. Somewhere in the Coalition diplomatic headquarters, an emergency meeting was being convened. Somewhere in the university administration office, personnel were frantically trying to figure out what had happened to cause an entire xenobiology class to file simultaneous withdrawal requests. Somewhere in a bar 3 blocks from campus, Professor Krell was ordering something strong enough to make him forget the last hour of his life. And somewhere in the human dormitory, Mira Chen was writing an email to her parents about how her first major class presentation had gone, completely unaware that she'd accidentally triggered a minor galactic incident and caused the revision of approximately 400 years of xenobiological theory. She signed off the email with "Classes are going great. Wish you were here," and a small smiley face emoticon. Then she opened her homework for tomorrow's class, Introduction to Galactic Politics, where the topic was scheduled to be why some species should never be allowed military commands. Mira had a feeling that lecture was going to be interesting too. The universe, as it turned out, had a sense of humor. It was just that the joke was usually on everyone who wasn't human. And the humans? Well, they were too busy planning their next extreme sport or arguing about whether ghost peppers or Carolina Reapers made better pizza toppings to notice that the rest of the galaxy had quietly started referring to their section of space as the scary neighborhood. Deathworlds, as Professor Krell had insisted, did not exist. He'd been wrong, and the galaxy was never going to let him forget it.